What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered Waters. Today we have the legend, the champ, Des Linden. Des is a two-time Olympian from the 2012 London Games and the 2016 Rio Games. She is the 2018 Boston Marathon champion, a feat that had never been completed in the last 33 years by an American woman. We talk about it all with Des today. We hear about her emotions and her feelings around her most recent Boston Marathon about a month ago. We roll it back to her childhood and understand her journey from running track to then transitioning to marathon. We hear some great advice on how she manages her self-doubt and thoughts and emotions throughout a really long race like the marathon. We hear about her experience in Rio and how challenging that was, especially around all of the most recent doping scandals that have come out here present day. We talk about her love for coffee and whiskey and hear some amazing advice whether you're embarking on competing in the Olympics this summer, Olympic trials, your first 5K, some fantastic nuggets. We enjoyed this conversation so much, and we know you guys will too. So without further ado, enjoy Des Linden.
This podcast is a Cannonball Media production.
Y'all know that Missy and I are all about prioritizing our health. That's why on a daily basis, we are utilizing the Element electrolyte packets, no matter what we're doing, pre-workout, post-workout, in a sauna session. It cannot be stated enough how much it helps keep our steady energy, improve our digestion, keep our skin hydrated, as well as help our cognitive function. Element packets allow you to maintain all of these extremely important aspects of health, and we cannot encourage our listeners to consistently get in their electrolytes with all of their amazing flavors. Get your free sample pack with any drink mix purchase at drinkelement.com/unfiltered. And if you're an Element insider, you have first access to Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water, which I cannot state is so delicious. So go drink up and enjoy. This is one of our favorite endurance supplements for stamina, recovery, and soreness. Extreme Endurance by X Endurance is clinically proven to reduce lactic acid by 26%. This means less muscle soreness. It also reduces oxidative stress by 39%, which means it's fighting free radical damage. If you're looking to enhance your training by enhancing your recovery, Extreme Endurance is such an incredible place to start. I know for myself, I'm doing CrossFit for the first time in like 8 years. I am sore every single day, and this makes a huge difference in my recovery.
And X Endurance also has so many other amazing products. Some of our favorites are their protein, their collagen and greens, and their Fuel 5. I love their protein for a quick option if you're on the run but need to get something in. They are Informed Sports certified and have so many different products that fit your specific needs. You can use code UNFILTERED to get 15% off your order, and we know that you'll see the benefits just as much as we do with these amazing products.
Des Linden, welcome to Unfiltered Waters. We are so pumped to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. I think I was like among listener number one of your podcast. I love the setup you guys have. I love what you're doing. So it's a thrill to be invited, and I can't wait to chat.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, you're coming off of, it was what? Not even, a week ago, coming off of Boston Marathon. Want to hear, I know you have done a million of them. I'm sure each one is different in your mind, but want to hear your thoughts, your perspective on how you felt it went.
Yeah, it's a crazy space to be in right now. Love competing, love that race, and coming off the trials was hard. It's such a quick turnaround, but yeah. I wasn't going to miss Boston because it's just my favorite race to do. But being in the pro field right now it's really interesting because there's so many great athletes. The times are getting so quick, like on the front, like so rapidly, and then the depth is filling in. So it does feel like a totally different sport when I'm out there than when I started. Just it's gotten so fast, and it's great. It's a great thing, but it's also when you're kind of losing ground on the group, you're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this much longer. So it's a tough feeling too.
Do you feel like, I think I saw an interview where you talked about just that there used to be this fear that I mean, anyone, men, women would have of like, okay, I have to, be more cautious. I can't take it out. I can't, you've talked about, you can't outgrit the mistake of taking it out too fast. Why do you think the fear has just kind of been eliminated?
I think we're seeing these barriers taken down and done in just a totally different way. Like typically in our sport, if you are 800 meters or longer, the best way to run it is a negative split to an even split. So you want the first half of the race to be a little slower and then pick it up over the second half. But you're really seeing people hold it together quite well later on. And I think once the first person does that and breaks a barrier that you thought was impossible, it's like opens the floodgates. So it's like the Bannister 4-minute mile that happened. And then all of a sudden, like boom, 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 there's a ton of people running it. So it's self-belief. And then obviously our equipment has gotten much better. And you guys have, had experience with that where it's like, this is the best thing. And if you're not in that, you're not keeping up. And then it's the game of chase. So that's factoring right now too.
Yeah, it's so interesting already how many similarities I'm noticing between marathoning and running and swimming. And it made me think of the tech suits.
100%.
Yeah, so we had, in 2008, 2009, this era of like full body tech suits that essentially were like floating devices.
Like
they just, made people float on top of the water. And so world records were being broken like left and right, like heat after heat after heat. It was just like world records were going down and they eventually got banned. And there was this kind of thought within the swimming community, like these world records are never going to get broken. And I remember the first few suit records that did get broken. And it's just like you're saying, once that barrier goes down, people really begin to realize like, oh my gosh, this is doable and this is possible. And then everyone just sort of rises to the occasion. And I feel like that's happening now in our sport. Like it just keeps getting faster. And it must be so fun for you because you're still actively participating and succeeding. And Katie and I are now just watching it. But to actually be there and be present to see your sport evolve in that way with the experience you have must be really, really cool.
It is. I feel like in the middle of it, it's kind of like, oh, this is frustrating. Why don't I have the tech? Is our tech good enough? And then you start with the innovation with your own team and it kind of evens out across the board. And then all of a sudden, again, you start to see the depth fill in and just the improvement. So it's interesting. It's really fun to watch. It's great to see the women's side of the sport just really take off because I think the world record for so long was just one of those marks that you're like, okay, that's never going to be touched. And now it's very frequently being surpassed. And so that's been cool. And, I think anytime you have progress, it's an exciting thing and there's storytelling opportunities around it.
Definitely. I think the one place that I marvel at that is different from swimming is, it's a little longer for me. It's like 4.5 hours, not 2.5 hours, but our longest race in swimming is the mile, which is 15 minutes. And so I feel like I would love to hear more about just this massive room for self-doubt, all of those voices in your head, positive and negative, all this room for error. Like, how have you navigated that? And I guess what would be the best piece of advice for someone coming into it that's never done a marathon, never even done a half marathon? How have you overcome those long runs and those voices in your head?
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite parts about the sport is it's such a mental game. There's obviously the physical component, but you're on your feet and you're out there experiencing it for so long that you go through highs and lows. Like every race has a ton of them and you have to learn to be really present. It's such like a Zen thing. So you train yourself, obviously physically, you do the work so that you can stand on the line and go, I'm prepared to do the distance. But you have your moments out there where you're going to have the highs and lows and you have to just trust all the work you've done. I think most people start to think too far ahead and it's like, I'm never going to make it to the finish line. It's so far away from where I am right now. But if you're really focused and really present, you can pop out of those moments at any second. And then you're like, oh, this feels quite, flawless. And then, and you feel like you're in kind of that flow state and then it'll go up and down throughout the day. But I think it's a really good lesson just for life in general, where we start to like create stress and anxiety about things that might happen or that are farther down the line. And it's like, if you come right back to center and just stay in the moment and do the task and become task oriented, like you solve a lot of problems and you're actually doing great work. So I love that side of it. I think it's fascinating, and it's something that we're always working on and no one really has it mastered. So it's exciting.
Yeah, because I mean, can you really do that in training? Like, I feel like it's so hard to replicate the race of, I know you do 26 miles and you do 30-mile runs, but like when it's not in the race, like in swimming, you can kind of practice that a little bit. But how do you practice that outside of a race?
Yeah. I mean, you do it in the workouts and, the 20-mile long runs, it's really just managing little efforts relative, right? And so that's kind of the fun thing about the sport is you don't get to tackle that distance at that pace at all. Like you have to have that leap of faith and you have to trust that, the training is going to get you through those last 6 miles, or like your fueling strategy is going to work to get you through the last 6 miles. And yeah, I mean, I think that's where all the bargaining and the self-doubt comes in. And something that you can do in practice and tell yourself you're ready, but it's a whole different thing when you're out there. And a tactic that I've used over the years is just like having a race plan. So I'll sit down and write out literally like, this is what I want to get accomplished in the first 6 miles, and like go through the race, because if you have a list of things that you're trying to do, it takes out the bargaining tactics because you're just doing the next thing on your list. And so that's just a tool I've given myself, but it's not something you can really truly experience in practice. You just have to, gamble on race day and see what happens.
And that's so applicable as well, because I'm thinking about your race tactic for any swimming race as well, like a 200, breaking it down into 50s. And if you have a goal for each 50, it does really help you focus on what's my intention for this exact lap. And then it really helps you stay present, just like you said, which I absolutely love. Is there a mile marker in the marathon where that mental barricade is going to start to crumble a little bit, or does it differ between marathons, or have you just built your strength and resiliency up to a point where it doesn't quite happen?
Yeah, I feel like everyone's a little bit different, and then you sprinkle in the weather and the competitors. So they all kind of play out a little bit differently, but at 20, it's going to get really hard. Like the whole saying is like, you run the first 20 with your head, like be really strategic, have a plan, and then the last 10K, 6 miles with your heart. So that's, the 20-mile mark is the halfway point. You get there and that last 6 miles feels like a whole nother second half. So that's always a mental barrier that you have to get over. And then in that last 10K or so, you kind of hit reset and it's like, all right, stay patient these few miles, and then really let her rip, like 3 miles out. And it's all relative at that point because the legs are giving you what they give you. But I think when I guess it would change depending on the race. But yeah, like 3 miles out, you can start feeling like, okay, I know I can get there, and it's build confidence really from that. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's really, just mic drop from you. You're like, it's time to inflict pain. And I've heard you say this live. I've heard you say this in your book. And like in swimming, that's, you can kind of break people within a race. But like you said, this is over the course of 6 miles where you see people's breathing and their facial expressions and how their gait breaks down. So I would love to hear that piece of how much of a mind game it is with your competitors, especially because you get to know them so well. You kind of know where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are.
Yeah, it's such a fun part. And I think people watching marathons are like, well, it's really just jogging for like 24 or 5 miles and then they sprint to the finish. And it's like all this gamesmanship. It's just like this really long game of chess where you're watching people's body language, like their decision making, how they grab their water bottles off the table, and you get reads on them throughout the day. But, after 20 miles, it's all bets are off, really just trying to break people from that point on in. And then it's studying and figuring out, like, you don't want to go to the front until you're ready to do something meaningful. So when someone makes that move with 6 to go, it's like, okay, you have to respond. You have to cover as much of it as you can. And then you're just trying to inflict pain. You really are. It's like this combat without the contact, right? Like I'm not ever landing a blow on you, but I want to break you like make your legs,
but I am,
like I want to make your legs go, and really between the ears too. I want to make you quit before I quit. So it's, but you're also damaging yourself in the process. So it's all this battling and balancing.
I think that was my favorite part about your book. So your book, Choosing to Run, is amazing for anyone that has not read it yet. It is so fascinating. And I loved learning about truly the way you wrote it was amazing, but the breakdown and the mind games and the strategy, I just found so interesting. I have personally never run a marathon. Katie obviously has and has done amazing, but the strategy of it and listening, I saw that. No, you did amazing.
Yeah.
It's so amazing to me to really hear that from your perspective and how you used your expertise and your knowledge and what you're able to get from your competitors in the middle of the race. I found so cool, because our race strategies, like we've been talking about, are 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes long. Like they're so short. And so to hear about that, you are now still doing so incredible, still achieving so many things, still breaking records. How much does your expertise play a role in your continued success and even in your goals moving forward of how you want to keep running?
Yeah, I think experience is so beneficial in the marathon because there's so much time on so much distance to cover. The more opportunities you get to do it, you're just always learning. And I think that's the thing that still intrigues me about the event. I've done it so many times and so many different courses, so many different conditions, and I'll still pull out lessons like from races. Like I need to change this, or I would go back and do this different in training, or I would race this section a little differently. And I think that's what keeps me coming back to it. So it's just this crazy big puzzle, and I don't think you ever really get it right, but you can always keep moving pieces and adjusting and tweaking. And that's definitely, I think, what keeps me coming back to it now and finding new goals. Like I won't PR again. That's not going to happen. It's not on the cards for me. But I do feel like I can still learn more about the distance and how to race it better and set new goals for where I'm at right now.
What was the goal, or what was the lesson that you took away from this past week?
I think Boston's always hard. I would make some equipment changes. I think I cramped a little bit. I was cramping definitely earlier than I should have. So I think nutrition, I can work on that still. I ran pretty patient, but I think I need to be a little bit more even over that first half of the race to give myself a chance. The last 6 is pretty much downhill, which sounds awesome. You're like, oh, it's downhill to the finish. But if you go out a little bit too hard early, you just don't have the legs. And I feel like I could tweak the effort on the course a little different next time.
And your open to growth mindset is incredible. And I think it's such a testament and reason to why you are in the position that you're in. And I think it might have been Caleb, one of our first interviews we did on the podcast, who said that he was going to stop swimming the day that he wasn't learning anything anymore. And I loved that so much. And I think to have someone who has your experience to still be able to sit there and say, I take something away from every single race, good, bad, successful, disappointment. Like there's something to be learned in everything. And that was so evident in your book too. Like throughout all of your training, all those years, you were always in that growth mindset and trying to improve and be better. And Katie and I want to take it back a little bit. You were super open in the book about how you got into running and your start. And I found it fascinating, your relationship with your dad, Dennis, and your sister, Natalie. You talked a lot about your dad being pretty tough and really putting you and Natalie in just about everything imaginable to keep you guys busy. And as you've gotten older, you've kind of understood and you are grateful because a lot of the reason you have the mindset that you do is because of your father, but it was hard at times. And then also the relationship with your sister and how special that has been and what you two have been able to do together. So if you wouldn't mind, talk to us a little bit about kind of growing up with Natalie and with your dad and what that was like and how it contributed to the athlete and the person that you are today.
Yeah. I mean, we were definitely a sports family. Like both of my parents love watching sports. And I think as soon as we were all maybe just before then, like we were going to be on teams, and it was, you're going to do soccer, you're going to do softball, you're going to do tap, like try it all. And then, you'll figure out where exactly you want to be. And I remember doing a lot of different sports and liking some of them and really not enjoying others. Softball for me was just like the worst. It was so slow and I was bad at it. And, I was like, I want to quit. My dad's like, well, you got to finish the season. You can't quit anything. That's not something we do. And which is a great lesson. But at the time when you're young, it was just like, this is miserable. And then I got to pick a new sport. Yes, exactly. And then I got to pick a new sport. They're like, okay, no more softball, but what do you want to do instead? Because it wasn't like, you didn't get a season off. It wasn't like, hey, I want to play video games during the day this time of year. They're like, no, pick a new sport. And so I picked track and field, which was like the first thing that I got to pick. And I chose run, like, oh, we're going to try this sport next. Like you're doing hockey. And so I kind of found that one. I think I kept it a little bit closer to my heart because it was like the first decision that I had with sports. And I was good at it. Like I had, I don't want to say talent because I feel like all the other sports, you're just, running the bases or playing soccer, running around the field. And that just translated really well to distance running. So that was a really fun way to find a sport. And, my sister went through all of that with me as well. She was actually good at softball. So I think that's kind of a split in our sports history. But yeah, she did soccer with me and cross country in high school and track and field. And so, we enjoyed the sports together. We made friends together, learned to love athletics and also being fans of sports as well. But also understood at times where like, okay, I think he's being too hard on us over something. Like we kind of took turns like going to bat with Dad if we needed to, which was great. It was great in that respect and kind of speak up and say maybe this is too much or maybe we don't need more practice and when it was two of us it was a little easier to get that message across and not sound like you were like just being lazy. Maybe
having that teammate must have been incredibly helpful for that. And I'm not going to give all of it away, you guys have to read the book, but all the travels that you and Natalie ended up doing together just sounded so amazing. And it sounds like you guys have such a close relationship. So I'm so happy that you've had that incredible support system throughout your life and your career. And I also want to talk about the shift from running track and field and doing the 5K and the 10K to marathoning and getting into what made you make that decision, your first couple marathons and maybe how those felt for you. And I loved the story about not making the team in 2008. And you kind of had a choice there of like, okay, maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought. Like I really believed I could make the team and I didn't. And instead of walking away, it just pushed you that much further to say, no, I really want to see what I'm capable of doing. So walk us through that whole transition and that time in your life.
Yeah, I had no interest in the marathon, which but I like when I went to college, coaches would be like, you're a 10K runner, maybe 5K is the shortest you can go. I'm like, I'm a 1500 meter runner. There's no way I'm doing the 10K. And then my last meet in college, I was like, fine, I'll do the 10K. And I think I was a runner up at the Pac 10 meet or something, which is, respectable. And so then opportunities for professional running were really slim for me. And there was a marathon team that was giving me an opportunity. And it was like, we do 10K up to marathon. I was like, I'll do the 10K. Like, that's it. Tops for me. And they were fine with that. And then I watched a bunch of my teammates kind of get ready for their debut marathon. So their first one. And honestly, it was just like envy that probably got me into it because we all trained together. We were all runners. And then they ran the Chicago Marathon. We just start of the day, we were the same. After they've crossed the finish line, they were in 26.2 and like they get to be marathoners. And I was just a runner. So I was like, oh, well, now they have something that I want. And that's actually what got me into the marathon. So I wish it were a better story that was more, I don't know, had kindness involved.
No,
or something.
It's honest. That's what we want.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like I imagine it's similar. Like I think in swimming, doing the harder events gives you this sense of, I don't know, I want to say swagger because I'm not a swagger cool person, but like it gives you this bigger sense of pride. Like for me, it was 400 IM. I feel like you turn your back, it's like not everyone can push through that pain. So when you think about the marathon, like, and being good at the marathon versus, oh, I'm a good 10K, there just comes this level of respect. Like people's ears perk up and they're like, oh, the marathon. Is that what you mean when you're saying like runner versus marathon, kind of that pride that it comes along with it?
Totally. I mean, title too. And just like to be a marathoner, you don't get a lot of titles after you like get to be a college graduate. Maybe you're a parent, you're a wife, whatever. And then it's like you run out of things to be able to add to the life resume. So that was definitely it. And yeah, I mean, I think, there's something of like, it's kind of like a sexy event, like,
Yeah.
it's worth talking about.
Yeah, not sexy doing it, but once you're finished, you're like, now you guys watch. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like going through the book, and I mean, it was fun for me because there's so many things. Feel like I was like, I know a decent amount about Des, and then I'm like, no, I really don't. And so I feel like each marathon, starting with 2008, 2011 onward, could be its own podcast. But I would love to hear from your perspective. Are there moments that you look back across over 15 years where you can pick out and you're like, okay, that marathon, that moment of grittiness or that moment of pride? Do you have a few that come to mind just instantly?
I think the 2008 not making the team was tough. It was such a tough moment, but I learned so much from that. And it was like a big pivotal point in my career. It was like, I'm going to figure out the puzzle. So that was the first time I looked at it that way. Like, I got to figure this out. Like, how do I learn this event so I never feel like this again? And then 2011, being runner up in Boston by 2 seconds was like an arrival. Like, there was all this self-belief. There was all this work that went into it. And you can say it, but until you put it on the page and get it done and put it into action, it's just words. And so that day where I was really competing with the best in the world and came up 2 seconds shy from winning a major marathon, it was like, okay, this is validated. Now it's not just me talking. It's like I've put the proof out there. So that was a big moment. And then I would go, I'll jump ahead some, but I think 2016 games, after having had to drop out in the 2012 games, and then deciding to rebuild for 4 years. Like, there's no guarantee you're going to make another team. It's really hard, and it was a big decision. So again, that was one of those moments where it was like, yeah, you could have thrown in the towel and no one would have been disappointed or upset, but it was really worth the time and commitment and the effort to have that moment.
And I'd love to, one of the things I love is that you and I were in the same Olympics, which is super fun, both in London and Rio. And I'd love to talk about London for a minute, because that was, I think, was it one of 2 races your entire career that you didn't finish?
One of one. That's
one of
it.
one. Okay, yeah. One of one. So literally the only one, and you literally had a fracture. You were running with a broken bone. And we talk a lot too about the double-edged sword that a lot of elite athletes have. And with some of our athletes, it's been perfectionism and like being incredibly hard on yourself and not being able to look past the small things that went wrong as opposed to everything that you're doing well. And I feel like after reading your book, getting to know you better, your double-edged sword is your pain tolerance. Like, you are just able to push through insane amounts of pain. And that is why you are a Boston Marathon winner. It's why you're a Masters World Record holder, like all of these things. But it also meant that you were literally running on broken bones. And we'll get into when you were diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and pushing yourself through that. So when those moments came, I mean, how hard was it for you to realize that there was something physically happening to you that mentally you couldn't just push through and overcome?
Yeah, I think that's like the hardest part, because it's what we do. We are in control of our bodies, and we can dig deep, and like you can block out a lot of stuff. And without going too far into it, it was also a misdiagnosis where it was like, this is tendinitis. Like, I know I can push through tendinitis. Like, why am I being such a sissy? And so having that paired with the feeling that I was feeling, was like, like, why can't I do this? This is so frustrating. That was really hard. But obviously the flip side of it was getting the real diagnosis and being like, oh, this is not tendonitis at all. This is like, makes more sense and isn't aligned with what I'm feeling in my body. And then you connect the dots and you're like, okay, that I can stomach. I'm not being a baby. This is actually a real thing. And let's get to work on fixing it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's hard when they're not matching up and aligning, like mentally. You're like, I know how to push through hard things. I can deal with this. Like what's wrong with me? And then you put in this sort of the scope of the Olympics and that stage, and like, am I choking? Am I like crumbling under the pressure? And so that was an extra like component that I think that I was wrestling with as well. And then there's the whole thing of like, should I even be here? Should I give up my spot? So it was a lot to manage in that moment.
Hey everyone, we just wanted to give a super special shout out to our amazing production staff over at Cannonball Media. We have an amazing team behind this podcast and we couldn't do it without them. So thank you so much for all of your help.
If you're looking to start your own podcast, they take care of everything from A to Z. So reach out to cannonballmedia.co.
As Olympians and elite athletes, Katie and I definitely understand the importance of sleep and recovery, but now just as a mom, as a professional, as podcast host, we still understand that sleep is so, so important. And we are incredibly thankful to one of our sponsors, Dream Recovery, for creating such incredible and impactful products that are science-backed to help you get the optimal night's sleep.
My favorite product is the pink Dream Tape. I have not stopped wearing it since I put it on my mouth 6 months ago. It helps me fall asleep faster and gives me the best night's sleep I've ever had.
And for those of you that are a little hesitant about mouth taping, they just released mouth strips. So it's a little strip as opposed to the full tape. It has all the same benefits as a full piece of tape, but it's a little bit more of a segue for those who are a little bit nervous or are wanting to try out something. And I have been loving those.
So we've got a special code for you. It's code Unfiltered for 30% off your order and 50% off your first month subscription of Dream Tape. Sweet dreams.
Good night.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing for those who don't know, because I actually didn't even know this, just the decision to, okay, I have this fracture. This might actually, even further injure me, but I need to compete because otherwise, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not an Olympian unless the gun goes off and you start. So can you, if you're willing, share what that whole process looked like?
Yeah, it was kind of eye-opening. They obviously, they send you all the stuff. You're marketed as an Olympian. You do interview, like the whole build up from trials to the games for the marathoners is a bit longer. So there's kind of this, I don't know, I guess they're preemptively calling you this Olympian. And so I, doing all the stuff, getting ready. And a couple, I don't know what the time frame was, but far enough out where there was a decision to be made if whether I should compete or not. It's like, well, it's tendonitis. We'll take all the time we need up to the start. And then if it doesn't feel right, I'll just give up my spot, and they can send the alternate, no problem. So I have all the gear. You don't bring any of your own stuff because you're not allowed to wear your own stuff really. Right. With like all the Rule 40s and everything. And I'm in the village. And it's a couple days before the race. I'm like, I don't think I can race. I'm going to give up my spot. And like, okay, well, here's the thing. If you give up your spot, like you have to leave everything you have because that's like team product. It's team gear. It's not yours. That stays here. And you're not an Olympian. So you have to leave the village because this is where the athletes stay. And we'll bring in the alternate, and the alternate will be the Olympian when they start the race. So you're better off just starting the race because if you don't, like all of this you leave right now. And that's, so it became it was a hard decision, but it was a much easier decision in that, I'd done everything I could up to that moment to try and race. So why not try and race? But yeah, that was it was kind of eye opening where it's like, you actually have to start your event to be an Olympian. Who knew?
Yeah, which is wild. I mean, I imagine it's the same for every sport. Like for swimming, you would have to dive off the blocks or you would have to go home.
I know. We were talking about this before, though. I've just never even heard that with our sport. Like it's when you touch the wall at Olympic trials and you are first or second, in an individual, like, you've made the team, you're an Olympian. Like, people just already start calling you that. So it was so interesting for us to think about that. Like, oh, like, are you if you don't? But I think
it's preemptive.
Yes.
It is preemptive. You're like, oh, you're Olympian, but they're like, you
Gotcha.
actually have to need to be. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine, coming out of that and then heading into Rio. You obviously referenced Rio as a point of pride, of being able to pick yourself back up. I mean, what did that process look like? How long did it take? I mean, I imagined a very, very just conflicting in your brain of like, obviously all you want to do is compete, but your body is preventing you. It's not something you can overcome with your mind. So what did that look like? Who did you lean on? And like kind of take us through that next quad.
Yeah, it was really hard. It's nice to have 4 years where you're like, okay, I can be really patient. I had the support of Brooks for another 4 years, which is really great, which was a product of starting that race. It was bigger support financially. So that was worth it. And it allowed me to be really patient, which is obviously something that you learn in the marathon anyhow. But, I went from running 120-mile weeks to like a couple months off, and then you're getting going again. They're like, you can run 5 minutes today.
Was that just excruciating? Were you like, I hate this?
You're like, okay, I'll get in a mile.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
That's such a runner thing. Like, I'm going to round this up. Yeah, totally. And then they're like the next day, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's like, oh, I'm really starting back from square one. So to have fears, but it's also, everything changes so quickly and the athletes get better so quickly and the competition, goes up in that time frame. And you're like, I don't know if I can make the team again. Like, this is going to be so much harder the second time around. But I think, being close in 2011 to winning in Boston, I knew I had it in me. And, I think having the title of Olympian it just felt like fake. Like, people would, like, if I wore the gear or something and someone asked me about it, I'd be like, oh my God, like I didn't touch any of the stuff. Like, it was there, but it was not meaningful. And so it was worth it to be like, I want to do this again so I can feel like I'm like actually an Olympian and like say that with pride. So that was definitely a very motivating force as well.
Wow, that's really powerful.
That's very powerful. Yeah. And I think, kind of now going into 2016, we have actually right now in swimming, there's a lot of news that's broken around doping, around basically they found out that in 2021, there were 23 Chinese athletes that actually tested positive. So there's a lot going on in the swimming world right now. But I know in 2016, that was a huge thing in the marathon world at the Rio Olympic Games. So would you mind sharing? I know you've been amazing in kind of being a spokesperson and speaking out about this. So I'd love to just hear your opinion and perspective around all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been reading about the Chinese, it was like 23 athletes. That's insanity.
Including
it's
gold
insanity.
medalists.
Yeah. And it's crazy, the response from WADA. All of it's mind blowing, and it makes me super depressed. But it's like, and when you're in it, you can't really spend the time thinking about it. You can know or have a really good gut feeling about certain athletes, but the reality is, unless they're pulled out of the competition, you have to raise your level and try to compete there. And it's why so many major injuries happen. You're chasing something that's not obtainable the way, if you're doing it the right way, and that's super frustrating. And then there's just moments and money that's just, it's robbery, really. And there's not a lot of other arenas in life where you could do that, get a slap on a wrist and be like, come back in 4 years and probably do it again. So yeah, that was kind of the sentiment in Rio, is some very questions in the race, and you felt that, and you could see it in the performances, and it was all there, but you weren't allowed to talk about it because it wasn't a positive test. And so when you have those things, and if you do say something, then it's like, sour grapes. You're just bitter. You're not good enough. And then it kind of unrolls in the future. And it's like, yeah, would have loved to say something at the time, but you just can't. So it's tough. It's a tough spot to be in.
I also think people who maybe aren't in the athletic world at that level, I mean, that would literally be like someone in a corporate office going and doing something shady and cheating and just not being fired. Like just being like, oh, carry on. Like, you know what I mean?
Great job. Here's a reward.
Yeah. Here's a promotion for you being shady. Like that. I mean, that it's not, I always try to remind it's not for us. It's not just a hobby or it's not just sport. There's money on the line. It's a profession. It's what you do. And so that's, I think, the piece that sometimes doesn't come through and why there is such frustration and, elevated emotion around it. It's like you're dealing with people's livelihood and people are supporting families, and it's just so sad.
I know. And I want to thank you, Des, because really you have been such an advocate for clean sport your entire career. Yeah. And it, as you said, it's a hard line to walk. And I think you've done an unbelievable job with it. And I know that there are so many athletes that are just so grateful for the role model you have been in speaking out about something that may be controversial, but it is unbelievably important and it needs to be spoken out about. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, likewise. I think that everyone takes their turn and bears a little bit of the responsibility, and it, no one should have to do it all. And I feel like we've all had people step up at the right time and say something powerful when it needs to be said. And then, you can kind of go regroup and someone else takes their turn. And it's going to be a thing that athletes do together, not just one person being front and center. But we've had amazing folks across sports do amazing things in that space. So we're all very lucky.
Absolutely.
Great. And we'll keep moving forward too. I mean, we, again, in talking about this, we know you've talked about 2018 Boston literally 100 million times. We, of course, want to touch a little bit on it, but leading up to it, as I mentioned earlier, you did get a diagnosis of hyperthyroidism, and you were, again, literally at the point where your doctors told you, if you don't take medication for this, you could go into a coma. Like your body is literally shutting down. How did you recover from that, come back? And was that a point where you were like, okay, I've been through this, I can now use it as motivation for Boston? Or was it like, I'm just trying to truly get back on my feet and get back to that feeling that I'm doing something that I'm capable of and that I'm running at a pace and a rhythm that just feels good to me?
Yeah, I think it's, again, where patience really served me well. I think we very slowly pulled me out of the well. And I think there's a lot of athletes that would rush that process. Like, let's give you this, and this, and that'll fix you right away. And you can go and run really well. And then we'll deal with the consequences of this, and this, and not that later. And for me, I'm always a long game person. And I think that's with sport, but also just general health. Like, I think if there's anything I learned from fracturing my femur and then this hypothyroidism diagnosis is like, sport isn't the end all be all. Like, I want to be healthy as an individual and have a long, healthy life and be able to enjoy it. And just, not feel like this broke me down later on in life. And so that was important to me. And that was something that kind of helped me stay patient in getting this treatment after the diagnosis. So I don't think Boston was ever, it wasn't really the motivator at that point. It was just like, hey, this is something that's on the schedule. It will help me. I'm excited about it. I know, like, I love to be there, but this 2018 won't be my year. It's going to be a stepping stone. And we'll see how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, then maybe that's the exit, maybe that's the exit strategy. But getting ready for that one, it was like, let's just get healthy and have progress and enjoy, the sport for a bit. So that was not like, all right, let's get back and try to win this sucker. It would have been too quick.
Yeah. Can you share I obviously know because we did research of the diagnosis, but kind of some of the symptoms and what the diagnosis actually was, just for people listening?
Yeah. So I think in both scenarios, you very kindly call me very tough, but I think it's just like a perception thing where it's like everything's dull, you know, like I don't perceive things necessarily the same way. It's just like really slow, gradual dullness of like first the fracture, it felt like an itch. It was like, I have this really deep itch. And with this thyroid thing, it was like, you know, so much of the marathon is getting really comfortable being tired and then knowing how to push through when you're tired. That's like the last 6 miles of the race. That's what we're doing. And so I was really tired all the time. And then, you know, there's irritability, which when you're getting ready for a marathon, I don't know, I'm irritable a lot. Like I'm always hungry, I'm cranky, I'm tired, you know, so there's all these things. And then other things started to creep in where it's like, I'm really cold all the time. That's not marathon related. Like, you know, I was losing a lot of hair, which was strange. And then the fatigue became this like totally new level where I just felt like very heavy. It was like I was carrying like a backpack full of lead around. Like I can't walk upstairs. Like I'm exhausted after 5 steps. And that's when I started to notice stuff. So I think there's always this line where it's like you get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's what a lot of our sport is about. And then it's like you have to figure out the signals of what's athletic and then what's like a problem. And that area for me, for some reason, is just, it takes longer for me to notice like problematic stuff. But yeah, so it was just fatigue, irritability, really cold, losing my hair. And then it just kept getting worse and worse. And I'm sure I'm missing more things. But yeah, that's kind of when I went in and was like, my husband, Ryan, was like, you need to go see someone. So I did.
Yeah, it's normally the support system.
It's
That's the kick in the butt.
They're like, get in there.
Yes. So having gone through all of that, I just, again, want to hear from your own words. What was it like in 2018 when you hit that tape and you are a Boston Marathon winner?
It was crazy. I mean, because like I said, I went in thinking like this is a stepping stone. The weather that day was bananas, and we talk about it in the book quite a bit. But that for me was like, oh, this will help me have a rough day, but still give me time in the sport. Like everyone's going to have a rough day today. And then, you know, midway through the race, things just started to fall in place in a weird way that were really advantageous for me. And I got my racing brain with 6 miles, 8 miles to go. It was like, this is the fun stuff. Like you're in it, you're racing, just do exactly what you know how to do. And I was able to take lessons from, my first marathon in 2007, that really close runner-up finish in 2011, and all the Bostons I ran in between there, and just use all these little lessons. And we talk about the puzzle and figuring out the event. And it was this really fun moment where I was able to pull from all my experience and figure out on the fly how to compete. And, I never thought that I had it in the bag. I wasn't like, I'm going to win this sucker. I think that 2011, let's be honest. And I just was, head down trying to get to the finish line as effectively and efficiently as possible. So when I did realize it, probably 50 meters from the tape, and it was just like, I cannot believe this happened in this way. It made all the sense in the world, to be honest, afterwards. I used all of these things that I had learned. But it was just an unexpected time. And I think for me, it was the takeaway is always be open to the possibility that it can happen. And you never know what it's going to look like, but be open to the possibility that you can have your moment.
I love that.
I know. And it's so perfect because we're so excited, of course, just to have you on the podcast at all. But it's also perfect timing because the swimming world is gearing up for Olympic trials. And we know track and field and marathon, they just had theirs in February, which was your 5th Olympic trials. And you placed 11th, which congratulations. That is absolutely incredible. And we're gearing up for ours in June. And we're so excited. Katie and I will both be there. But we couldn't imagine anyone better to ask about the preparation before a big event. And even though it is a different event, you do have so much expertise and knowledge in that area. And one of my favorite quotes of yours about tapering is, some like to call it tapering, but I prefer putting on the finishing touches. And I love that because it almost takes some of the pressure off of the taper, where it's like you've done the work, like really all that you need to do. And for us, these last 2-3 weeks is really just be confident in the work that you've put in and just put the cherry on top in certain places so that you go in there being your best. What advice do you have for athletes that are preparing for what will be the greatest athletic meet of their lives, the biggest swim meet of their life? If it's not swimming, anyone gearing up for just something that means a lot to them and is really important, what they can do in those final weeks heading into it to put them in the right headspace for it.
Yeah, I think you can't overthink the moment. I think that's the biggest mistake I see with people getting ready for the trials is they know how to compete, they've done all the work, and then it's a lack of confidence where you're trying to prove to yourself that you're ready instead of just get ready, and it's not like, you got to trust everything you've done and that the race is still the same. The moment's different, but you don't have to prove anything. You just have to be ready for the moment. So just be confident in the work you've done. And I think, that's such a hard thing to do, and it's an easy thing to sit and say, but if you've done it, you look back at the ways you've done it in the past, and more often than not in our sport, people overcook themselves trying to prove to themselves that they're ready instead of just preparing for the moment. So figure out what the intention is of the work.
And do you mean about, like, when you say like prove to themselves? So in swimming, it's okay, I got to do like one more extra 50 at the end of practice to like prove to myself that I'm still really fast at this 50 butterfly. Is it the same in running, or are there other elements?
Yeah, it's really similar, right? Like, I need to be 5 seconds faster than the prescribed pace so that I really know I'm ready. Like, but you just need to do the prescribed pace because that's what's going to get you ready. And why overwork your body trying to prove something that just doing the prescribed work would have been absolutely fine. So having that confidence that enough is enough.
I love that. That's such good advice. And then just, again, in general, like, I love it because there's so much applicable between running and swimming, but then so much applicable to just real life too. It's just trust yourself, trust the process, trust the work that you're doing. This is selfishly a little bit for me. For any new runners that are either wanting to get into the sport or wanting to get into racing, 5K, 10K,
marathon,
turkey trot, whatever it is, what is your best advice just for new runners that are looking to get into the sport?
It's a long game sport. Like, you can do this for so much of your life, and a lot of people jump into it later on. So keep that in mind, and it's advice we all need, but that we hate to hear. It's just stay patient. And like, I'll need that in a week because I'm taking 2 weeks off right now after the marathon, and I'll do the first run and I'm like, this is the worst. Like, why did I get out of shape? I hurt all over. This is the worst. This is dumb. And, if you commit to a routine and a schedule and you have a game plan, make it a healthy habit and just stay patient, because once you get in the groove of it, you'll have this moment where you forget that it hurts and you'll be like, oh, when did I get in shape? This is weird. And you'll have downs after that. But once you get in shape, like, I think I put this in the book. It's like, getting in shape sucks. It's not fun. Being in shape is awesome. So commit to getting in shape. Yeah. You stay patient with it.
Yeah.
It's so true. Okay, 2 weeks off. What does Des Linden do with 2 weeks off and no running?
Yeah, I've been pacing around the house a lot. Like, I have all this extra energy. I'm like, I don't know what there's things I should be doing. So that's week 1. Like, energy reserves are like on the rise. And then I'm going to Mexico City with my sister. So awesome. Head out there and just tour around and eat really good food and drink all the good drinks. And yeah, that'll kill a week.
Amazing. And for people who don't know, Ryan, your husband, is an incredible marathon runner as well. Is he also, like, is he kind of throwing it in your face like, oh, I'm still getting my runs in? Or is he taking a break with you?
He's a little bit of both. I feel like when you have the person who's working out at the same time, it's so much easier to get out the door. But I'm in like full on sloth mode, and he's like, "Oh, like I want to sit around too." So I'm dragging him down right now a little bit.
It's okay. It's only for 2 weeks. Yeah. And you are a massive whiskey connoisseur. Is that right?
Enthusiast. I'll call it that.
Enthusiast.
Don't ask me deep questions on whiskey because I won't know the answers.
I love it. What else? We just love getting to know more about you. What else are you passionate about? What are things that make you happy, that give you that kind of sense of balance that, Des is so much more than just one of the greatest marathoners of all time?
I'm pretty simple. Good books, love reading, and then good dogs. They're all good dogs.
You have
but
two,
we have
right?
Two. Yeah.
And one of them is very appropriately named Boston.
Yeah.
Correct.
You're coffee connoisseur, because I feel like I remember, didn't you bring, or maybe it was our friend Rob, but didn't you bring your own like coffee like weighing machine? Like you're not going to Starbucks and just ordering.
No, yeah, I'll say coffee snob. That's a fair assessment. But
Okay.
yeah, we actually have Linden by 2. We roast our own beans and sell those, and we're pretty specific about how we like roasts. And then I'll bring the hand grinder to events and the pour over with the hot water thing. It's a whole setup, and so it's pretty high maintenance. But if you're at an event and you're like, I really need a good cup of coffee, come find me. I gotcha. We'll get you caffeinated.
We are going to absolutely take you up on that. We
Definitely
could both use
need
it
it
today.
right now. Yes.
And we'll get into our final 3 questions. Last thing I want to talk about before we do is your podcast with your fellow competitor and teammate, Cara. Nobody asked us. It is amazing. It's hysterical. And I think one of my favorite things you said about it before you guys started is you were like, we could hate each other. Like, we really have no idea how this is going to go. And it's so fun. I just listened on the way over here. I listened to the most recent episode you guys did post Boston, and it's so fun. You guys have such great chemistry. You're literally getting kicked out of a tap room. Like, but tell us a little bit about being a podcast host and how that experience has been for you. Obviously, Katie and I, it's brought a lot of meaning into our lives, and it's been a really amazing and grateful for us way to stay involved with our sport. So how has that been for you and Cara?
Yeah, it's been great. And I love what you guys are doing. And I think you're just celebrating great athletes, but also raising your sport up. And having 2 females sit down together and work together towards something, I think is always valuable. Cara and I didn't really know each other, and we were, rivals, basically competitors, when she was in the marathon. Towards the end of her career. And so you never know how it's going to work out, but I think it's been really fun to get to know each other and also show that like competitors can also work together. And our goal is always just to elevate the sport. And whether it's through our own storytelling or bringing on athletes, we do get really picky about who we bring on because we're not researchers. Like, I love that you got the cards, you read the book. Like, you're obviously very prepared. We're like, what do you want to talk about today? And then we'll just riff.
That's so fun. Like, the fact that you guys are like drinking, like I told her you guys are drinking beer. I'm like, how can we incorporate that in Unfiltered Waters?
When the first episode's going to be that you see Katie and I out here with a glass of
little
wine.
Like, cheers. So
I'm all
so
for
fun.
it. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. Wait, so if you and Cara didn't really know each other that well, how did you guys get paired together?
So it's kind of funny. We were both griping about equipment in the sport and some sponsor changes and just different business/equipment angle stuff on Twitter, formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter. And it was kind of a joke. We were going back and forth, and I was like, we should start a podcast called Bitter Old Ladies or something. Because, if you have any comment, it's like, oh, you're just old and bitter. And so then we got, connected DM and email, and it was like, yeah, we should try it. Let's just see what happens. Like, worst thing, we do 3 and then never do it again. But it's worked out all right.
That's cool.
It has. And it's so fun to listen to. So highly recommend. Those are like 2 major call to actions if you're listening: choosing to run, read the book, and nobody asked us. Listen to the podcast.
Subscribe.
Katie's favorite thing to say.
Yes.
All right, Des. Well, we have all of our guests answer the same 3 questions at the end of every episode. So we'll start with the first one, which is, what is a moment within either the sport of track and field or marathon or just running in general that has brought you the most amount of joy?
I think it's got to be maybe I'll take it off myself. I'm going to say Meb's victory in Boston 2014. Coming back the year after the bombing, couldn't happen to a nicer person. And for me personally, it made me believe that maybe that was something I could do someday.
That's so beautiful.
I think you're the first person to select somebody else.
Yeah.
That's really, that just gave
I didn't
me
know.
full body
I didn't know
chills.
what the question was.
All right, so same thing. Basically the moment or memory outside the sport of running, marathoning that's brought you the most amount of joy.
Any vacation with my sister.
I loved reading about those in the book too. Those were so bad. Is it true? I think in the book you said, correct me if I'm wrong, the only continent you hadn't been to was Antarctica. Have you guys been there yet?
No. That's not even on the bucket
right.
list yet, but it should be. We should just
You're
get
like, we
that
don't really
done.
care to. It's okay.
It's so cold.
Yeah.
Oh, so when you've got an awesome trip coming up. All right. Final question is, what is a word that you would use to encompass something that you're working on, a perspective that you're focusing on, or something you're trying to focus on more of moving forward?
I think I went with grit on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like, I was going to go with consistency because it's kind of unsexy, but it's something we need more of. But grit's like even a level below that because it's just about the hard work. And I was reading this thing years ago about Steph Curry. He was kind of in a slump, and it was like, we're having to see him work, and it's hard and it's weird, but this is where he proves his greatness. If he can pop out of this slump, and that's going to be through the things that like look human. And so I like that, where you just have to do the stuff that's the hard work that we all have to put in. And everyone watches race day and is like, oh, that's magic. I could never do that. But it's all the stuff, it's all the gritty stuff behind the scenes that anybody can do. It's accessible to anybody. So that's my word.
Or consistent grit. You could combine them.
I didn't know I could do 2 words.
I mean, you can break all the rules if you want. People are
Love it.
rule
Okay.
followers, which I am too. People are like, am I allowed to do 2? I'm like, yeah, I mean, we're making this up as we go along. You can do whatever you want.
All right. I'll take the double.
Perfect. Well, Des, thank you so much. This has been so fun catching up. I know you're on your break, so we appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. You owe us a trip to Nashville to sauna, cold plunge, see everyone here.
I know, so I can meet you in person.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Stay tuned.
All right. Thank you so much, Des, and enjoy your second week of recovery.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and watching Unfiltered Waters. We are so grateful for your support. If you could please hit that subscribe button on any of the channels that you're watching, and maybe even give us a rating or review, we would appreciate it so much. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.